600,000 work hours and $4 million saved in 1 year. 15 times ROI. 60% increased revenue. Do all those results sound impossible? Well, what if I told you those were results from Monday.com customers? When all of your people and data are connected through one work platform, you can achieve more than you ever imagined. Start your free trial at Monday.com.
Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Conway Report wherever you get your podcast. You're watching on YouTube. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Empire Media. That's AMPIRE. Always much appreciated. We're going to keep pumping out the content for you. Today, I'm joined by Sportico's Eben Novy Williams as we discuss something that's right up his alley, and that's the business of sports as it pertains to the Washington Commanders sale. Eben knows his stuff. He's covered the sports business industry for a while, and he has his own he has a podcast called Sporticast. You can follow him on Twitter at Novy, Novy-Williams. He's an expert in this area, folks. So we get into all the particulars of the Commanders sale. The lurking presence of Jeff Bezos. We talk about some of the groups involved, including Josh Harris, Todd Boley, what those groups would look like if they won the bidding. We also, again, we talk about the lurking presence of Bezos, how that affects the price right now and possibly things going forward. Trust me on this, the Bezos group has had chances to say that they're not interested. They haven't come out and said that yet. Why is that? So we get into all that. The banks, trust me, want Bezos involved because it drives up the price. Would Dan Snyder feel compelled to sell to the highest bidder, or could he eschew a bid by, let's say, Bezos if he doesn't want to sell to him and go to a lower bidder? Again, we get into all that. Will be a full or partial sale. The expectation that I've heard all along has been, especially the expectation internally, has been a full sale. But is that for sure? Well, until it happens, we're going to cover every scenario. So we do get over into some possible scenarios. I still think the most likely one is a full sale. But again, until it's done, we don't know. And then we get into the timetable of this as well. So a lot to cover in that. And it's something to keep you informed because I think this is all important to know as we go forward with this process. So again, you can follow Eben. Again, I told you on Twitter at Novy-Williams, and then listen to his podcast called Sporticast. So I hope you enjoy him because he was very informative. In a minute, I'll get to that, but I want to go over a couple offensive coordinator coordinator names and just that whole situation before we turn back to the sale. So what we know right now this week is that they've interviewed three people, and that's Pat Shurmur, Ken Zampese, and Charles London, who is the Atlanta Falcons quarterbacks coach. We also know that Darrell Bevell, longtime NFL play caller, coordinator, basically, he told them that he wasn't interested in the job. He's also told other teams that too. Washington has 1 of 10 jobs that is open for an offensive coordinator. That's tough, folks. Trust me on this, though. They're open for a reason. They're not all these jobs are all that great. Like, there's definitely flaws with this job, and there's flaws with other ones too. So the question is, which one is most flawed, and where do you get the most security? I think the security part is a tough one here because with Ron Rivera going into his 4th year, no winning seasons yet, you know with a new owner, you're going to have to produce. That's just the way it is. And until you do that, then you're going to be on that. You're certainly going to enter on the hot seat because of that. So who's going to want to come here in that situation? Well, there are people who would. So are they the kind you want? We'll see. But again, the ones we know are there. Bevel says no. The other name lurking out there is Eric Stoodsville. I think he will be in for an interview early next week. That is a think, not a lock as of yet. I think by the time you listen to this if it's Friday afternoon, I do believe I'll have an answer at that point if he is coming in or not. So stay tuned for that. I think he is an interesting think. Actually, in this case, I do believe he's an interesting candidate in this whole position because of some of the things I've heard from him from a few people in this industry. And he's been pretty much a running backs coach most of his career, most if not all of his career. He's also been a coordinator, but he's really highly respected as a run game coordinator. There's a reason why multiple staffs keep this guy around. When he was in Denver, I think it was 4 different coaches he was hired, I think he's hired that, but he's kept by 3 other coaches throughout regime changes. You don't do that unless you're really good at what you do. And then in Miami, he was kept around by new coach Mike McDaniels for the same reason. He's, again, highly respected for the run games that he puts together, and he has a reputation for knowing how to protect the passer. That's a big deal here. Why? Because they want to run the ball and they need to protect the passer. Those are 2 huge issues. So that's something that's right up his alley. I will be honest, like one of the things I heard about Pat Shurmur is that he didn't do, especially like in Denver, did not do a great job in that area. I've heard some mixed thoughts on him from people. Some people like him, and some people are just like, he got better when they weren't, later in his career when he was with Chip Kelly. They felt like it helped him as a play caller. So we'll see. I think a benefit of him is he's certainly been around for a while and has done it. And I think if you're Rivera, do you take the guy who's been around like that going into a key year? Is that the bigger risk, or would you go with a guy like Stoodsville who hasn't called plays, but maybe he's a guy that fits what you want to do and can bring some level of energy? And my understanding, he kind of coaches guys hard. All that stuff is pretty good. I think what this team needs, though, is somebody who knows how to design a strong run game and protect the passer, and then also create a pass game off of that. That last part will be the key. And if and when he does interview, that's the part he's going to have to sell Rivera on. Can he be that guy? Now in Denver, my understanding is it sounded like he was kind of on a track to becoming a play caller, and he was an interim coach in 2010 after they fired Josh McDaniels. And I think that kind of sidetracked him a little bit. It's hard to get back on there on that track as a running backs coach. So I don't know what kind of guy he would be in that regard. I just know some of the things right now, early returns on what you hear about guys is that. And I think with Shurmur, you're going to hear more mixed thoughts because he's done it. There's more of a track record. With a guy like with Eric Stoodsville, there is no track record. So you're not going to hear that as a play caller. We don't know. So there's, just because he's new doesn't mean he'd be better. It's that those are some things you'll hear about him in his current position. Anyway, it's all interesting. I do think, I wouldn't be shocked if by the end of next week, or week from now, that we know who the coordinator is. Not for sure. Don't hold me to that, please. But I do think that we'll have, I think we'll get it by then. The only way we don't is if there are a couple guys who say, yes, Ron, I'm interested, but let me go through this head coaching process first. If that's the case, then it could go on just a little bit longer, but we will see. Hopefully I'll have better information for you come Monday on the next podcast. So there you go. And by the way, one of the things I want to do, I'm going to talk to ESPN's Jordan Reed, not former Washington tight end Jordan Reed, but ESPN's Jordan Reed, the draft analyst, about Sam Howell, how he compares to the quarterbacks in this class, and some of the early thoughts in the draft class. And I say the early thoughts because I know he's pretty high in the corner class in this draft. And I think that's going to be a key spot for this team to address in the offseason. So, and I will ask about the offensive line too. Anyway, it'll just be an early quick look at the draft, focusing on what he thought about Howell coming out and how he feels he compares to this quarterback class. And should Washington consider anybody in that class, or would you just roll with Howell? Anyway, there you go. That's it from me. So let's get to my conversation with Sportico's Eben Novy Williams.
This episode is brought to you by KPMG. At KPMG, innovation is the go-to state of mind. Their visionary thinkers and advanced technology help you see beyond the now, uncover new insights, and turn them into opportunities. KPMG can help you leverage the value of data and drive transformational outcomes through innovation. To explore their thinking, go to kpmg.us.
This episode is sponsored by State Farm. Buying insurance can be complicated, and you might have a lot of questions, like, what if my policy doesn't cover that? Or, what if I need to make a claim in the middle of the night? Good news, State Farm is there for all your what-ifs. You can reach them 24/7, talk through any questions with your agent, and you can even file a claim on the State Farm mobile app. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Call or go to statefarm.com to get a quote today.
The NFL playoff action continues. We're one step closer to Super Bowl 57, and for the NFL divisional round, check out DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. New customers can bet just $5 and get $200 in free bets instantly. Plus, all new and existing customers can take a shot at an even bigger payout with DraftKings stepped-up same-game parlays. Boost your NFL winnings with each leg you add up to 100%. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code KEIM, K-E-I-M. New customers can bet $5 on the NFL divisional round and get $200 in free bets instantly only at DraftKings Sportsbook with code KEIM. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details.
Well, Eben, this is an interesting process here. And it's kind of hard to even know where to start with all this with the Commander's sale. Where do you think we're at in this process? Because we know there was a deadline that wasn't really a firm deadline to submit bids. Some people did, some people didn't. Where in general do you think we're at right now with this?
Yeah, it's so hard to tell. And John, two team sales are alike, but this one has been particularly bizarre, I think, for a lot of reasons. One of them being oftentimes when teams are for sale in leagues, all the other owners want to be involved in the process to a degree. They want to stay informed. They want to know what's happening, who are the bidders, et cetera. In the NFL, particularly around this one, everybody seems to be very hands off. And I've talked to a few owners and people that work for owners about why. I get the sense that everyone in the NFL wants Dan to reach the conclusion on his own that he should and wants to sell the team. They want him to do it for a really high number. It makes all of their teams worth more money. But everybody is kind of afraid of poking too much, prodding too much, and maybe forcing him to change his mind. So there's been a lot less chatter, I think, around the NFL around this sale than we've seen in other sports or even around other NFL teams. And that leaves everybody asking a lot of the same questions, which is, what was the deadline? Who bid? Where was Jeff Bezos, which we can get into? Yes. And also, what are the prices looking like? And then lastly, what is Dan planning to do? Does he want to sell the whole thing? Does he want to sell a path to control? Is he looking for LPs? I don't think really any of those questions have been answered right now.
No, and I don't think they are. And it's funny because going back to the NFL owners, Irsay comes out at the meetings in the fall and says what he did. And since then, it's like there seems to have been a directive, like you said, don't poke the bear, and what they don't want to have. They're afraid of what may come out if you start poking the bear, it seems like.
I think that's right. And you know better than almost anybody, Dan is a fairly volatile person as a businessman. Yeah, I think that there is optimism that the end result here is that there is a new controlling owner of the Commanders at some point relatively soon. And because of that, I think a lot of NFL owners are saying, I don't need to know more. I'm going to let all of this play out as it would. And hopefully when either you or me or some other journalist breaks the news, we'll be happy with what the end result was.
So, and I do want to bring up the phrase relatively soon, because we've heard that throughout, and it's been for a little while in this process. Because I think when fans hear soon, they're thinking, could it be next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? In this process, what do you think relatively soon means?
It's so hard to tell. If you had asked me that question 9 months ago or a year ago, I would have said these things take months. And then Roman Abramovich sold Chelsea in a right. $3.5 billion transaction in 6 weeks. Right. And that was faster than we probably ever seen these deals come together. But it's certainly possible for that to happen. I think in the Jeff Bezos scenario, there was a world in which if he was interested or if he is interested, that this could happen very quickly at a very easy big number. And I think if Jeff is indeed not interested, then I think it becomes a bit more complicated. One of the things that we are seeing across all sports, and I think this is true of the Lerner family, which has put the Nationals, the baseball team, on the market, is that a lot of times people want to test the market. They don't know for sure they want to sell. It seems like a good time to sell a sports team. The Suns just sold for a $4 billion valuation. Everybody that owns a sports team in the US looked at that number and thought, great, my team is worth a lot more than it was a week ago because of that number. So I do think there's, to a degree, maybe Dan is just testing the market and seeing, look, if someone offers me $7 billion, great. I get out. I made a lot of money. Everything's great. If the offers are $6 billion, maybe I'm not as interested. So,
Right.
so there's a degree, I think, where maybe it is just kind of testing the market. But I would not be shocked by either thing. If you told me this was done in 3 weeks, it wouldn't shock me. And if you told me that this dance was still going on at the start of the 2023 NFL season, honestly, it wouldn't shock me that much either.
How much does it help that with some of the prospective buyers went through this process to bid on Denver?
I think it makes a big difference. So if you look at someone like Josh Harris, who owns a large piece of the 76ers, a large piece of the Devils, was involved in the Broncos, unsuccessfully involved in that auction. The NFL has been through this with him. They know who he is. He's probably gone through some sort of a background check to a degree already. I think that makes things a bit easier. The truth now at this point, John, is that these teams are worth so much money. Buying any asset for $6 billion, the amount of people that have the ability to write that check or to finance that deal is just so small that the background checks, the days of somebody trying to buy a team and no one knowing who they are essentially gone for the NFL. So in some ways, we're talking about a strata of rich people that in some ways kind of vets itself already. But there's no question that having the Broncos sale, the fact that took a long time, but the fact that people like Josh Harris or a Todd Boley thought about putting together some money, talk to other people who might want to join them in a bid, the fact that all those wheels were already greased to a degree just 12 months ago probably makes the process a bit easier, both on the buy side and on the sell side when it comes to the Commanders.
With some of the the groups, the big name out there, like you said, is Jeff Bezos.
Yeah.
His side has not come out and said, no, he's not interested. So until they do, his name's going to always be there. Do you feel like this kind of pushes some of the other groups from offering maybe more than what they'd want to?
This is the biggest question, the $120 billion question hanging over the whole thing. Everybody wants to know, what is Jeff Bezos thinking? And the truth is that Jeff, and he knows this, he doesn't need to bid in the earliest rounds. He doesn't need to formally do it right now. If I was Bank of America selling this team, I would want it very clear to the market that Jeff Bezos is not involved quite yet. This is the big question, because everybody else is worth a lot less than Jeff Bezos. Nobody wants to get in a bidding war with him. They know that if Jeff Bezos wants this team and Dan is willing to sell it to him, which is another kind of wrinkle there,
right,
that Jeff Bezos is going to get this team. And bankers, lawyers, investors, nobody wants to waste their time spending 5 months, 2 months, whatever it is, looking at putting together an offer, raising money to try to buy the Commanders, and then to learn that they never had a shot in the first place. And again, if I was selling this team, even if Jeff had told me he was interested, I would try as hard as possible to make sure that never came out, because I don't want to spook the rest of the market. And we saw this exact thing play out with the Broncos. Rob Walton's name did not come out immediately, and the people around that sale really didn't want it to come out when it did, because that was a signal to everybody else. Oh, this is the 11th richest person in the world, and I'm not going to outbid this guy. So the fact that he's interested makes me less interested. So I think for the sake of trying to have a vibrant auction, trying to have other groups that get to a bigger number, I think everybody's interest right now is not to have Jeff Bezos be the center of this conversation. But it's impossible, in some ways impossible to do that. And I think until there is a deal in place with someone that is not Jeff, I think his specter is going to loom over the whole process, unless he comes out and publicly says he's not interested. Yeah, I think that people are going to ask this question up until the final moment of the final bids, just because, again, when you're Jeff Bezos, you can enter this process essentially whenever you want. And you know that you can offer $500-800 million more than the next closest person and close that deal very quickly.
And I think then it goes, you kind of said something, and this is something we've all heard, which is, would Dan, or wondered and certainly heard the possibility that would Dan want to sell to him?
Yeah.
And if there is something on his side where he's like, I will never sell this guy, how much can the NFL come back to him and say, if you don't sell this guy, looking at the offer he just made, we're going to release this report, or we're going to, you know what I mean? Like, you wonder about that aspect too. And does he have full control over who he ends up selling to?
To my knowledge, he does have full control. This is very much not a situation like what we saw with Donald Sterling. I mean, even Robert Sarver, who
right.
came to the conclusion, was forced to sell, kind of however you want to parse that. Robert Sarver had to sell the Phoenix Suns, but he had full control over what that process was like. And if he did not want to sell to Matt Ishbia, and Matt Ishbia was the highest bid at $4 billion, and there was someone at 3.2 that Robert wanted to sell to, I don't think the NBA would have, or even had the ability to step in and force him to go to the higher number. And my guess is that that's true with the Commanders as well. I am personally, and I don't know this for sure, I'm kind of skeptical that if Jeff Bezos is offering 7 and Josh Harris is offering 6.2, I would be shocked if Dan Snyder chose the significantly lower number, just because of his other feelings about Jeff and the Washington Post or whatever it is. That would really surprise me. But again, I think that the NFL, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, I think the NFL is really giving a wide berth on this. I think they're being really hands off. And as much as if I owned a different NFL team, as much as I would love to have Jeff Bezos be part of the club, and as much as I would love for the Commanders to sell for $7 billion, if the end result is that it sells to a little less for another very rich person that's not named Jeff Bezos, and Dan Snyder ends up exiting the club, I think I consider that to be a win to a large degree as well. So again, I don't think the NFL really has that power, and I would be shocked if they even tried to exercise it.
Well, because you wonder too, with the specter of the Mary Jo White investigation hanging around out there, how that also influences the timing of everything.
No question. And I'd be curious to your thoughts. I mean, you cover this team intensely. How different do you expect that report to be? I mean, how much do you think kind of new we're going to learn, and how much do you think actionable after that?
Yeah, and I think that's the big question, because initially it was just supposed to be about the Tiffany Johnston situation that came up at that roundtable hearing in early February last year. And that situation, they were going to investigate that because that was new. Well, that doesn't seem like it would take a year to investigate. And, there was the other situation that was settled because the team playing. Was there something else that they learned about that? Was there something else hanging on? I think there's a lot of questions that makes you wonder, because of how long it's been and because of what they initially said they were going to do with it, that, is there something more that they found? It's a lot of the stuff that some of the women went through is public. They testified, it's all out there. The only thing that would really be new is what happened on that plane. And if that ever came out, that would be the one where you'd wonder about it. But I don't have any proof of that. But it does, everything makes you wonder in this case. Yeah.
I feel like deja vu almost every time there's either a new lawsuit or new findings or new hearings about what has gone on in the Commanders world in the past 20 years. I just feel like I mean, at the point now where I just can't even remember if I've heard this anecdote before, if this is a new anecdote. Yeah. Should I have new outrage about this, or just the general outrage I had when I read about it the first time? Yeah, there's just so many layers to what's going on. There's been so much great, both really good reporting, and also obviously between lawsuits and congressional stuff, so some really other good avenues for facts to come out, that I'm kind of now at the point where nothing surprises me. Right. I honestly can't even remember what I've read before and what's new. And I think a lot of people feel that way, both fans and people who work in the NFL as well.
I think you're absolutely right. Could you see a situation too where it's a limited partnership with the intent of selling the whole thing within X number of years?
I could see that. Yeah, that's the only thing that seems reasonable for me in terms of Dan raising money that's not a controlling stake now. Given the way, the very high profile way that his last limited partners fought and exited the team, I just don't understand how, and I don't really see a world in which someone is willing to buy 20% of the Commanders and just leave it at that. That's right. A very different conversation, as you said. If I'm buying 20% now, but the contract says in writing that Dan is willing to sell the whole thing to me in 5 years or 10 years even. So yeah, the only way I can see a limited stake trading is if there is some written and with a strict timeline, a guarantee that the person, man or woman, who's buying that limited stake is going to have a shot at buying the whole thing at some point in the relative near future.
And I guess the curious thing for me would be, why would Dan want to do that? But to be honest, I think it would be to build a stadium so he could have the stadium.
Yeah, I mean, he's already taken on a bit of debt, from what I understand. The stadium obviously is gonna require a lot more money. I do think that the stadium is just harder to do when Dan Snyder is the one trying to do it at this point, given the way that local lawmakers seem to have reacted to the whole
Very
thing.
much so.
Yeah, so exactly. I think there's other hurdles to the stadium that is not just whether Dan himself has the money to do it. But yeah, I had heard that Dan had been telling people around the NFL about a year ago that he was looking to raise LP money. So was looking to sell minority stakes, and obviously so much has changed in the Commanders world and also around Dan Snyder in the past 12 months. So that obviously could be very different in terms of what he's thinking about now. But there was kind of always an assumption around the NFL for the past few years that at some point around the stadium, Dan was going to need to raise money. And that has kind of collided with a lot of the other issues and his hiring of Bank of America. So again, it's very unclear to me, and maybe Dan doesn't even know what he really intends to do right now, but there's at least a group of people in the NFL that have known for a while and thought for a while that Dan was going to be trying to raise LP money. I just don't see it, given his reputation, given the way the other ones have played out. I just don't see that happening right now.
It seems his name is a hindrance to any stadium deal right now, based on what we have heard. I'm sure you've heard a lot of the same stuff. And so how much does a stadium, the having to build a stadium, how does that change, enhance the value of what somebody would be buying?
Yeah, I think add is the right word there. And I think that would probably surprise a lot of fans. It certainly makes the team more expensive, not just the top line number, but that if you buy the Commanders for $7 billion, you may need to put another 3 into a new stadium, or 5 if you're going the Stan Kroenke route. But we talk a lot about owners wanting new owners. They don't want turnkey. They want the ability to come in and put their stamp on a team. And Chelsea's a great example of that. Chelsea needs a new venue of some sort in London. Todd Boley and Clear Lake Capital, very aware of that. And I know they're excited about the idea of trying to solve that riddle and trying to solve it in a way that is really additive from a business standpoint. And new stadiums, whether it's not new anymore, but what Jerry did in Dallas or what Stan did out in LA, if you mix, retail with a little bit of residential, and you have mixed use, you have a hospital, you have housing, you put all those things together, you get a really good business model where the team is the center of the spoke. And in the NFL, you have essentially 16 days, 8 days a year where you're making money. But if you have a mixed use retail, there's 365 days a year where you're making money. The Braves are another great example of a sports team that has done this right. So every new owner in all of these sports is looking at real estate as one of the main ways, alongside media, the main ways they can parlay that asset into a lot more money. And I do think that even though it makes the whole enterprise more expensive, I think a lot of people who are looking at the Commanders see the idea of I can be the person that brings a new stadium by virtue of not being Dan. Right. And I can build that stadium in a way that really, really maximizes the business of this franchise and the business of the whole umbrella company 365 days a year. And I think that's an advantage. And just as a contrast real quick, the Broncos were a little different, right? The Broncos are not going to have a new stadium in the next 5 years, probably not going to have a new one in the next 10 years. So Rob Walton doesn't really have that, doesn't have that ability, at least not immediately. The owner of the Commanders, the new owner of the Commanders, if there is one, will have that ability right at the start.
Then also, you buy the practice facility, which is high premium land in Loudoun County, 255 acres, and then the stadium in Prince George's. How much does that add to the value of it? Because whatever you want to do with the land, you can do.
Yeah, it can be huge, and we saw that go wrong to a degree in Carolina with David Tepper and the Panthers trying to get a development done right over the border in South Carolina that fell apart, and David actually ended up taking a pretty big financial loss, from my understand, on that whole process. But again, yeah, any real estate that the team has, practice facilities are even another good example, right? I'll go back to Dallas. What the Cowboys have built around their practice facility is a massive,
and that's what I hear these guys
generator.
Want to do.
Exactly. And so if you can do that, if you can make that a place that the Commanders fans want to go in August to see the team, to watch them practice. And also, oh, there's all this other stuff here, and there's an esports arena, and there's mixed use retail, and I can do my shopping here. And there's high school and maybe college games that are happening around. There's a way to build that also into a big revenue driver as well. And again, especially if you're talking about someone with Jeff Bezos's money, the fact that it would cost a little bit more money to do that, I think, is not outweighed by the fact that it's just a great opportunity and a way to build what the Commanders and what the Commanders adjacent businesses look like for the next 20 years, and to do that really in the next 2 years.
Josh Harris is a guy, again, bid on the Broncos, owns 2 other franchises. David Blitzer, part of that group, who is also doing what we said earlier about the Guardians, where he's a minority partner with the intention possibly of buying the team down the road. What do you know about Josh as an owner? How is he, I know there's always criticism of an owner in any sports city, but how has he been received? How is he perceived as an owner in those other sports?
Yeah, I think he has a good reputation. The thing that I have always found so interesting about Josh, particularly around bidding for teams, is that he's a value investor. It's what he was doing at Apollo. It's the way he's looked at all these other franchises. From what he was the second, I believe, the runner up when Steve Cohen bought the Mets.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, Josh was $1 billion short of Steve Cohen. Josh looks at these franchises when he's bid on them in the past, and really closer than almost anybody else, I think, values them at what they are. And what we've seen in the past is that doesn't get you the team. Right. The person who was looking at the Suns and saying, this is what the Phoenix Suns are worth, was dramatically outbid by Matt Ishbia by $1 billion plus. So I think that if Josh is going to get the Commanders, my guess is that he's going to need to break from that model to a degree. I think he's going to have to force himself to overspend, because that's what it takes to buy a multi-billion-dollar sports asset right now. And he looked at the Broncos. He looked at Chelsea, from what I understand. I don't know if he made an actual bid for Chelsea, but the thing that's always interested me about Josh is that the way he values these teams and the way he bids makes me think that if he keeps that up, I'm not sure if he's ever going to get to actually buy one. But that said, he has the money. He's been very successful with what they've built in both Philadelphia and in New Jersey. Continuing again, this idea of real estate. They own the Prudential Center where the Devils play. I think they've done a really good job there. I'm sure that in the world of NFL owners, as they look at and vet new people for the club, I think Josh is exactly the type of person that NFL owners would love to see sitting across the table at owners' meetings.
Todd Boley, there's some reports that maybe he's out. Don't know. It could also be that he gets pairs with somebody else.
Yeah.
What do you know? He too owns sports teams. So
he's also an interesting one, because he is very usually paired with somebody else and is usually not the main money person. If you look at Chelsea, he got most of the attention. And I think if you were to ask most casual soccer fans, who just bought Chelsea, they would say it's Todd Boley.
Right. But
the main money was Clear Lake Capital, a big private equity firm in California. Todd has his hands full, is an understatement, I think, with what's happening in London right now. He is kind of breaking the mold as we speak about spending and what contracts look like in the EPL. I would be surprised, I think, if Todd was seriously involved for the Commanders, just given that there's just so much going on in his life right now from a sports asset. But he was looking at simultaneously, at both Chelsea and the Broncos. And one of the big questions we had during that process was, if he gets one of these, is he automatically out for the other? And we kept hearing that he was willing to and interested in both. So maybe it is true that he can simultaneously do what he's doing with Chelsea and also have whatever his obligations are with the Dodgers and everything else that he owns in his portfolio, and also be a bidder and an owner with the Commanders. But that would surprise me to a degree, but I have not heard anything either way concrete on that.
Last question then, is there someone that you'd say keep an eye on this group that, obviously Bezos is the guy everybody's got to keep an eye on, but aside from that, because Josh would seem a natural one as well, is there someone else that you'd say keep an eye on here?
Yeah, this is kind of a cop out, but I always say keep an eye on the person that has not spoken about it, right? Usually when these teams go for sale, there's somebody someone very early on that throws their hat in the ring, talks publicly about it, that person is almost always the last person in the bidding, right? The person who feels the need to kind of puff up their own image about the auction usually is the last person there. And almost always there's the mystery bidder, right? You find out, oh, there's 3 bidders and one of them's Boley and one of them is Harris. And there's a mystery bidder that has a banker and a lawyer that's never done these things before and has magically stayed totally out of the reporting limelight. So I always feel like, and I wish I knew who these people were. I would be reporting them if I did. Yeah, exactly. But I generally feel like if there is somebody serious that no reporters have gotten a whiff of, my guess is that might end up being the most serious of the bunch when it's all said and done. Right.
And that's been my sense too. Eben, I appreciate you joining me. Tell people where they can follow you. Twitter, you got your podcast, Sportico. Let them know.
This is fun. Thanks, John. Yeah. So I write over at Sportico. We cover just the business side of sports. So for people who are interested in billion-dollar team sales, marketing deals, naming rights, all that, Sportico.com is where you can find us. And I co-host the Sporticast with our editor-in-chief, Scott Soshnick. That is a Monday and Wednesday every week podcast. So check us out there or go to Sportico.com.
Eben, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sean.
The Hulu and Disney Plus bundle.
Glorious.
The stories that move us, like Loki and The Mandalorian on Disney Plus.
This is the way.
The shows that everyone is talking about, like The Kardashians.
When you love, you know you're alive.
And The Bear on Hulu.
Yes, chef.
Hulu and Disney Plus. Better together in a brand new bundle. All for just $9.99 a month. All of these and more now streaming. 18 and over only. Access content from each service separately. Offer valid for eligible subscribers only. Terms apply. See thedisneybundle.com for details.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Eben for joining me, and thank you, as always, for listening. I'll be back, like I said, on Monday with another podcast talking to ESPN's Jordan Reed, the draft analyst, talking Sam Howell, how he compares to some of the quarterbacks in this draft, etc., etc., etc. Talk to you next time.